Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Brazil once again, and we're going to continue on with this mini-series of Brazilian beers that I've been reviewing for you over the last couple of months. So this is yet another of the beers that I picked up in one of my recent orders from Beer Dome. They've got a great selection of Brazilian stuff. I've been very impressed with the quality of the Brazilian beers that I've had thus far, so if you're interested to try some of them, then Beer Dome in the Netherlands is where you need to look. So yeah, for this review though, we are going to go to another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. These guys are supposed to be very, very good at what they do. They were the first brewery in the state from what I understand, and the beer that we're having a look at today is supposed to be a little bit of a beast. So very curious to see how it turns out. It's also one of the first big dark beers that I'm going to review from Brazil as well, so fingers crossed it's another good one, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to go to Fortaleza, which is in Ceará state in the kind of northeastern part of Brazil. It's on the north coast if you like, and quite close to the sort of corner or tip of Brazil, I guess we could say. And we're going to have a look at my first beer from Cervejaria Elementos Artesanal. So this particular beer is called the Abyssal. It comes in at 12% ABV, and this one is a Russian Imperial Stout. So yeah, I think this one will turn out to be a little bit of a monster. So yeah, fingers crossed it's another good one, but let's crack on with the review then and see how we go. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Cinco Elementos. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for the Brazilian beers that I'm reviewing for you, and that's being added to fairly regularly at the moment because I still have a good few beers to work my way through. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. And I will apologise in advance of the history section for any bad Portuguese pronunciations. It's a language that I'm not really familiar with at all. But anyway, on to the brewery notes then. So, Cinco Elementos, to shorten their name because it's easier to say, Cinco Elementos are based in Fortaleza in Ceará state in the northeast of Brazil, and the company was founded back in 2016 by a group of friends. So Wellington Alves was the main man behind starting the project, and he'd previously been a home brewer, but he graduated in medicine and worked as a surgeon, and apparently it was during a trip to Belgium before he did his residency that he first came into contact with the idea of microbrewed beers and craft beers and things like this. But a while later, when he moved back to Fortaleza, he encountered more friends who were interested in craft beers, and he was joined in the founding of the brewery by Albayete Neto, Francisco Barroso, Eduardo Lima, and Ricardo Clodi. So they chose the name Cinco Elementos, or 5 elements as it would be in English, because of the 5 founders, and they also wanted to kind of use the imagery and the idea of the 5 ingredients of beer. So that's water, malt, hops, yeast, and the brewing mind. So there you go. So yeah, 5 founders, 5 different elements of brewing. I think that works quite well. But the first beer that they released was called David and Goliath, or Davi ao Goliath, I think they would say in Portuguese. Again, bad Portuguese pronunciations, my apologies. But this beer was an American paleo that was first made back in 2013 by Wellington, and it was one that he made to kind of pay tribute to his firstborn son. But at first, these guys had 5 regular beers, and they won a number of awards in the early days, actually. This beer won a gold award in 2016, from what I understand. But they started off with an initial brewing capacity of 1,200 litres per month, and by early 2019 this had been scaled up to around 7,000 litres per month, and over the course of that year they began to experiment with barrel aging as well. Over the last couple of years they've continued to progressively scale up the brewery capacity, create new recipes, and as of July 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 115 different kinds of beer. They've also got a tap room on site which has 14 different taps. They offer brewery tours as well, and you can find the brewery in the Luciano Cavalcanti area, which is to the east, in the eastern side. Fortaleza. So yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Cervejaria Cinco Elementos Artesanal, to give them their full name. But yeah, they seem like a really interesting brewery. I have to admit, I would love to get down to Brazil and have a little look at some of the different craft breweries down there and talk to some of these guys if they speak English. I'm not sure what the standard of English in Brazil actually is, but you know, maybe I can learn a little bit of Portuguese or Spanish or something and use the Spanish to understand Portuguese to an extent. Who knows? That's something that I would like to do. I would like to get down to Latin America and have a little look at some of these different places, because it's supposed to be absolutely beautiful. So yeah, that is it for your history section of this video. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's get cracking with this beer then. So as you can see, this one is actually quite a big bottle. The bottle's been sweating a little bit as well because it's quite warm here in Sweden today. But yeah, this is a big half-litre bottle. I'm not sure what I paid for this, but I think it might have been about, you know, 9, probably 10 euros or something like this. But, you know, Brazilian beer, the South American countries, or Mercosur as we would call them, they don't have a trade deal with the European Union yet, which is a bit of a shame actually, because it would be quite nice to be able to get these things a little bit cheaper, obviously. But I don't mind paying a little bit more to get the Brazilian beers. They travel a long way to get here, and they're pretty good quality. It's the same with the Russian stuff that I order from Beer Dome. But yeah, I think I paid about 8 or 9 euros for this bottle. But when it's a half litre of a big 12% Imperial Stout, that's not too bad, I don't think. That's not too bad. But from what I've heard, actually, in Brazil, craft beer, relative to their wages, is actually very expensive. I've got my good friend Fabrizio, who now lives in Iceland, that was telling me that. But you can see the artwork on this is lovely. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but you can see a big fish kind of lurking there. And yeah, you can see the Cinco Elementos symbol on the top of the beer there as well. But you can maybe see it a little bit more clearly on the side of the bottle. But yeah, this one is a big half-litre bottle, this, so I think it will be a little bit of a monster actually. But yeah, let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting then. I'm going to enjoy sipping this for the rest of the evening, that's for sure. So nice little bit of smoke on the opening, and we'll get it out and into the glass. So there we go. I think this will be very, very nice actually. So just look at that pour. Look at that. That is just mental. So we've got, I think, about 2/3 of it in the glass just now, but just that pour is insane. Look how oily that thing is. And I'll tell you something, it smells beautiful as well. We'll get into the aroma in a little minute. But yeah, I should also add, as I said earlier, this beer is a 12% Russian Imperial Stout. It's got cocoa and molasses added into it, and it uses oats, wheat, and I think a bit of rye in the malt base, it said on the Untappd as well. But yeah, as you can see, and as you would expect from an Imperial Stout, this one's poured a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. Remember, when it comes to the colour of your beers, the colour is determined by 1, the type of malts that you use. This determines the magnitude of the colour. 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Then any adjuncts or barrel aging that you do to the beer will also affect it as well. But that tends to be a bit more prominent in you know, sour beers and IPAs and stuff like that. Of course, when it comes to the Imperial Stouts, that's not going to play such a big role. But yeah, lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. This one, 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there, but the head is pretty much non-existent. It didn't have much of a head when it came out, but I would say it's a kind of medium to dark tan head that's on this one, a little bit of a kind of foamy ring around the edge of the glass, and then a few kind of wisps just over the top of it. But when it's 12% ABV, you wouldn't expect the head to hang around all that long. But if we shine the light through this beer, it's pretty much black as night. It just has a little bit of a kind of Coca-Cola coloured hue to it around the very edges. But yeah, it certainly looks pretty damn nice, I have to say. So let's have a closer look at the aroma of this one then and just see how we go. That does smell very nice. It does smell really good actually. So yeah, just checking that that's lined up so that my OCD is happy. But yeah, That is an absolute monster, this one. So straight away with this beer, you can tell that this has been quite a long boil stout, I think. So this stout will probably have undergone a boil of like, 4 or 5 hours. Something like this. You can smell those big treacly molasses type sugars in there. They have added molasses into this, of course, pardon me, but you still get the impression that the beer is pretty damn big. And this is, as I say, one of the first beers that they ever did. So this is potentially one of the kind of pioneering imperial stouts of Brazil, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, the aroma of this is pretty damn special, I have to say. But very straight shooting. It's quite an old school aroma, I would say, at that. But yeah, so backbone of this beer then, you can smell a little bit of that roasty, toasty black malt in there, like a bit of a well-fired bread crust. On top of that though, you start to get, you can smell a bit more of a kind of brown bready, sort of rye bready sort of thing. Definitely a wee bit of a smooth kind of and slightly sweet rye bready quality in there. There's 1 or 2 sort of woody and nutty characters to the beer as well, which I think is great. And there's also a lot of chocolate to this one. You can get that kind of cocoa nib sort of thing coming out of this beer, which is also very, very nice. But yeah, so I think this comes across very, very nicely. So yeah, where do we start with this one then? As I say, on top of the kind of smooth brown bready qualities, you get a lot of chocolate out of this, and it's quite a high percentage cocoa, an 80-90% cocoa. In fairness though, you do get a wee bit of a kind of milkier chocolate out of it near the front of the nose, so there's a wee bit of, a 60-ish, 60% cocoa in there as well. You always find this on the actual palate as well, that you get a kind of spectrum of cocoa when you try these beers as well. The front of your palate's obviously picking up more of the sweeter side of things, whereas the back part of your palate picks up the more kind of savoury and bitter parts of the flavour. But yeah, in the middle of your nose as well, there's a lot of brown sugar to this one. You've got that, darker, highly treacleized molassesy sort of thing, which I really like. There's a big sweet caramel element to it, and there's also some nice big kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity elements to this beer as well, which are very, very nice. It's got a little bit of that kind of cookie, grainy sort of brown sugary thing to it as well. But I really like how that goes together. Yeah, the aroma out of this one is very nice. I do get wee hints of like vanilla and kind of nutty elements out of it, as I say. The more that I smell of it and the more that I get used to it. But yeah, I do like how all of that goes together. It really works out very, very nicely. So yeah, on the I think that kind of covers the sort of malty side of things. I don't think there's too much more to say about it than that. It's quite a straight shooting and quite an old school stout, this one, and of course the Russian Imperial Stout leans towards the more roasty toasty side of the spectrum anyway. But yeah, on the hoppy side of this beer then, and remember, the longer that you keep a hold of this beer, the more the hops are going to drop out of it, but you can still detect a little bit of hoppiness in this, that's for sure. But at the back of the nose, you definitely get a little bit of a kind of earthiness out of it, there's no question about that. And there's still a wee bit of a kind of, you get a little hint of a floral sort of thing, but it's quite smooth, and there's also a wee bit of a kind of grassy, zesty kind of side to the beer as well. But on the fruity, juicy side of things, it's quite interesting. I get a little bit of a kind of sharp raisiny note out of this one, which is really interesting. Then underneath that, you get a sort of, you do get a little bit of a kind of plummy character. There's a wee bit of a juicier plum in there, but I do get a bit of a sharper raisin that kind of lingers in this one, some juicy plums and a bit of fig, a bit of a juicier fig out of the beer as well. But these are elements that are quite typical of this style. That shouldn't be anything particularly surprising. But yeah, the aroma of this beer is very nice. Like I say, the aroma comes across with the beer appearing to be a little bit more sort of old school and things like that, which if it's one of the first beers they've produced, then that's not a surprise. This recipe is potentially one of the ones that Wellington did in his homebrew days and then released later. But yeah, it's beautiful, this one. It's really, really nice. It's got a nice balance to it. Sharper fruits, big smoothness to the malty backbone, and a wee bit of toastiness and graininess and stuff underneath, and you still get a wee touch of hoppy character out of it. So yeah, this is definitely an interesting one, that's for sure. So take a little bit of time to ponder over the aroma. As I always say, that's half the experience when it comes to craft beers and whiskies and sakes and things like this. But I think it's about time that we get stuck into this beer then. So yeah, this one is the Abyssal, a 12% Russian Imperial Stout from Cervejaria Elementos Artesanal, I got it right, from Fortaleza in Ceará state in the northeast of Brazil. Let's get stuck into this one. Slanja, skål, cheers, or as they say in Portuguese, felicidades. Let's go. Oh yeah, that is really damn nice. Yeah, I think I might have this one just a little bit cold actually. I think I've maybe still got it a little bit cold, but the fridge wasn't set too low. It was set about 8 degrees or so. But yeah, the flavour out of this one I think is very, very nice. This is a very old school kind of straight shooting RIS, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah, lovely, lovely beer this one. I'm going to say straight away, big thumbs up to Cervejaria Elementos for this one. They've done a great job with this. Yeah, awesome stuff. You know, there's so many like pastry stouts and big sweet stouts out there these days that, you know, every so often you just want something like this. You want something that's just, you know, old school and it gives you a little bit of a nostalgia trip. You know, this reminds me of the really old school things that I used to try from Brewdog and stuff like that. So yeah, this is awesome. It's very silky as well. That's the other thing I'm noticing about it. But safe to say, the Brazilians know what they're doing with their craft beer. That's been increasingly obvious as we've tried more and more of their beers. And yeah, it's great to see more and more countries getting on the kind of craft beer bandwagon, if you like. But yeah, let's break down the flavour of this one for you then. So straight away, across the middle of your palate, you can feel that nice toasty, well-fired bread crusty sort of thing. That forms the backbone of this beer, absolutely. So I'm guessing there might be a little bit of special B in this, or a little bit of, you know, one of the carafas, something like that. Of course, there are a good number of malteries and things like this down in Brazil, so they've probably got a few of their own varieties and stuff. But yeah, this one, I think this has got to have a little bit of carafa or special B or something like that in it. It's quite familiar. It reminds me of the Nerd Brewing beers that I drink from here in Skåne in the south of Sweden. So if you like Nerd Brewing here in Sweden, you will enjoy what this beer has to offer for you. It's quite similar to theirs. So yeah, in terms of the kind of bready side of the beer, then as I say, the backbone of this beer is most definitely a roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust. That's the backbone of the beer. If you focus on that middle third of your palate then, what you'll notice is that on the front half of that middle third of your palate, you start to get a few sort of woody flavours out of this one, and a little bit of a very slight nuttiness. You can feel those undertones sort of coming through. Then at either end of that middle third of your palate, you'll get that kind of bread crusty and slightly bready build-up that you always get. And in the middle of that, you can feel a little bit of an almost like brown rye bready type quality. This beer does get a little bit kind of breadier the further that you go into the aftertaste with it. And I do like that side of it. This beer's got quite a few layers to the flavour, if you like. I mean, no doubt about that. And there's a lot of chocolate to this one actually, and it's quite a dry sort of powdery chocolate. If you think about the powders that you use to make like chocolate milk and things like that, this beer has that kind of chocolatey element to it. And it's, as I said earlier, it goes in a spectrum. So it comes out, it sits on top of that kind of rye bready layer, and at the back of the rye bready layer, you can feel the sort of higher percentage cocoa ones, you know, the more bitter 80-90% cocoa chocolate. Then as you go forward towards the front half of that middle third of your tongue, you can feel that it sort of mellows out a little bit. You start to get a more kind of, 60% cocoa, a slightly more milky element. There are one or two wee hints of like vanilla come out of this beer. Further you go into the aftertaste as well, which is kind of interesting. And the flavour of this beer, it reminds me of the smell of like, the tobacco that you get in the bags and things like that. It reminds me a little bit of that. The sort of the little bit of flavour that kind of comes out on the front half of that middle third of your tongue. But yeah, there's a spectrum of chocolate. There are more bitter things at the back of that front third of your the back of that middle third of your palate. As you move further forward, it just mellows out and becomes, slightly sweeter in a sense. Sitting on top of all of that, though, you can feel the sort of silky brown sugary layer in there, and there's quite a lot going on in that, in fairness. So yeah, sitting on top of that, you can feel there's this silky layer of, the treacle molasses sort of thing. Remember, they've added cocoa and molasses into this beer. The thing that's interesting about that is that actually most of the brown sugar comes across as quite, treacly and molasses. It's really like you've almost got like a big oval sitting on top of that chocolatey layer, and it's just, a very smooth and quite silky brown sugar. As you move, in the dead centre of your palate, you get a little bit of the kind of boozy brown sugary bit, and as you move further out from that, you start to get a little bit of the sweeter caramel and a bit of the biscuit. But as I say, the treacle just sort of sits underneath that, which is quite interesting. So the way the brown sugary notes come out in this beer is certainly quite interesting and quite different to what I've had before. But yeah, the interesting thing about this beer as well is I'm noticing the further I go into the aftertaste with it, it gets a little bit more kind of bready and brown bready and stuff like that. It almost has an element of a kind of oatmeal-y type stout to it, which is kind of interesting. The amount of brown bread that you get out, but it does have rye in it from what I understand, and it's got oats in there as well. So something interesting going on in that relationship. But yeah, that I think describes the kind of layers that you've got going on in the middle third of your palate with this one. It's a very, very layered flavour that you get out of this beer, that's for sure, but definitely a very old school Russian Imperial Stout this. But I really like this one. This is very, very good, so massive thumbs up to Cinco's Elementos again, like I've said. But let's focus on the other parts of the palate then. So as I said earlier, on that border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you get a little bit of a bready build-up and a wee bit of graininess there. Then the base of that back third of your palate, you can feel there's a nice roasty, toasty. You get a little bit of the more kind of roasty, toasty, grainy element out of the beer. On top of that, of course, you still get some of that sort of rye, brown, bready kind of thing. And then above that, you start to get the more airy, yeasty elements to the beer. So yeah, I do like how that goes together. I do like how all of that goes together for sure. Yeah. So you can feel, as I say, the flavour on that back third of your palate. It feels a little bit taller in a sense. So you've got these airy yeasty notes, the brown bread, and the wee bit of a kind of well-fired grainy notes underneath. And as you come back from the back of your palate, you can feel the flavour condenses down a little bit. Then all those nice things in the middle third of your palate that I described earlier, they're a bit more sort of squashed together, and I really like how that goes about its business. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate. If we move on to the hoppy side of things, back corners of the palate, there's definitely a nice wee touch of earthiness in there, and as you move further forward, it has a little bit of a herbal quality, and as you push further forward towards the front corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of a kind of floral aromatic sort of thing out of the beer, but it's quite a smooth floral aromaticity, as I say. I'm not sure exactly how old this beer is, and we don't need to worry about that too much, obviously, because it's an Imperial Stout. And these things can sit for quite a long time and still be fine, but the hoppy side of this beer is smooth, and the hoppy character, of course, will drop out of the beer a little bit more the more it sits there, of course. But round the front curve of the palate, the beer is it has a little bit of a lighter kind of grassy element to it. There is a wee tiny little bit of a zesty quality just kind of lingering there, but not too much. And then behind that, of course, you've got these nice juicy fruity esters. So let's focus on that front third of your palate then. Border region between front third and middle third of your palate. Again, you get a little bit of a kind of bready, grainy kind of build up there. Then the base of the front third of your palate, a smooth brown bready note underneath. Wee bit of a kind of you know, a little bit of an oaty kind of smoothness in there. Then sitting on top of that, you get a nice kind of oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. And this is, you know, again, quite straight shooting and what you'd expect of the Russian Imperial Stout. So let's break down those fruity notes to the beer. And I have to say, I'd be curious to know what hop they're using in this one. Is it maybe just a little bit of, you know, Chinook and Cascade, or, you know, Columbus or something like this? I'd be curious to know what the where they're getting these kind of fruity notes. Of course, you know, you could use something like Barbe Rouge from France, or you could use you know, Eureka or Summit, I think, are also very good for these fruity notes. But I'm not sure exactly what hops they would have used in this one. Maybe it's something classic, like a bit of, you know, Chinook, or just a bit of Columbus or whatever, actually. And it does, in fairness, you do get a wee touch of spiciness off this beer the further you go into the aftertaste, so I do wonder if Columbus is one of the hops in this. But anyway, that's by the by. Fruity part of the beer then. So when you take this beer in, you absolutely get a wee bit of a raisiny sharpness. Not as much as you would think you're going to get from the aroma, right enough, but you do get a wee little bit of a raisiny sharpness. But on the back half of that front third of your tongue, you get a wee bit of a kind of juicy, plummy kind of note there. And as you move further forward on the palate, on that front third of your palate, you can feel it sort of mellows out a wee bit, and it gives you a little bit more of a kind of juicy, figgy type quality. So that's really nice in this beer. And as you move on to the front half of that front third of your tongue, you'll start to get a little bit of a kind of black curranty element, and there's a wee bit of a kind of more juicy and bright blackberry just on the very, very front tip of your palate. These are all things that are common with these Russian Imperial Stouts though, so they shouldn't come as a surprise. But it's got a nice fruity edge to it as well. I think it's fair to say that. But yeah, I think that's all we really need to say about the flavour of this one, so we can round off with the mouthfeel. So yeah, this beer for me, it's got, I'd say it's a pretty full-bodied beer, this one. I find it to be at the bottom end of full-bodied though. It's not the thickest of ones that I've come across, but then again, it is an old school kind of RIS, if that makes sense, and they're not as thick as the you know, the big pastry stouts and stuff that we're getting today, so you need to bear that in mind as well. And also, the thing I would say from my point of reference, and this is different for every beer drinker, it's very difficult actually for breweries, I think, to beat the thickness in mouthfeel that we get from some of these Scandinavian Imperial Stouts, like the ones from Denmark and from here in Sweden. I'm yet to find anyone that can match the thickness of the mouthfeel that these guys seem to get. So yeah, that's not a surprise. In Brazil, of course, is a very hot country. They don't want their beers to be stupidly thick, I guess you could say. But apart from some of the sours probably. But yeah, this one, I'd say it's kind of bottom end of mid-bodied. Carbonation is very smooth. It's got a lovely slickness to it. And I think it's a very nice example of an Imperial Stout and the RIS sub-style, generally speaking. But yeah, IBUs, I think it's got to be at the top end of the spectrum. You do get a nice bit of a bit of bitterness from the malt base. You do get a nice little bit of bitterness from the malt base and from the hoppy side of the beer. So it's got to be, you know, a higher one, you know, 80, 90 IBUs. It's got to be up there at the top end of the spectrum. The malt base, like we say, it's got a really interesting layered character to it. Roasty, toasty, smooth bready, you know, dry sort of chocolate that mellows out, and then a bit of a sweeter brown sugary element to it. It's got all of that in there, which is great. And then you've got some lovely, juicy, fruity characters out of this one. So yeah, I really, really like how this beer goes about its business. The fruits are nice and kind of juicy, but at the same time they've got a little bit of slickness to them as well. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that this one, the Abyssal from Cinco's Elementos, is a beautiful example of an old school Russian Imperial Stout, this. And I'm really glad that I bought this. I don't care about the fact that I paid, you know, €9 or something like that for it. Definitely worth it, and a nice treat, and cool to be able to review it for you guys here on the channel as well. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this review then. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. As always, let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below, and let me know some other Brazilian breweries that I should be checking out too. You will see more Brazilian Imperial Stouts reviewed over the next little while. I think I've got 5 or 6 of them to work my way through. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media. Check out Cervejaria Elementos Artesanal, to give them their full name. Check out Cinco Elementos from Fortaleza in Ceará, Brazil. If this beer is anything to go by, then they're doing some pretty special things. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out their social media, and that was that. This was the Abyssal 12% Russian Imperial Stout from Cinco Elementos in Fortaleza in Ceará down in Brazil. Slanja, skull, cheers, and felicidades. Awesome beer, this one. Check it out if you get the chance.